You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
So have you followed the story of John Lennon's watch, Mark?
It's an absolutely fantastic story, isn't it?
Tell people about it.
I read a piece by a guy called Jay Fielden in the New Yorker. It's absolutely amazing, isn't it? And describes the John Lennon's Patek, is that how we pronounce it? Or
Patek Philippe.
Patek Philippe 2499 watch as being the El Dorado of lost watches. And and it was stolen, wasn't it? I mean, the basic story is it was stolen from Yoko Ono by a Turkish guy who worked for, I think he might have been a chauffeur or something like that, who then tried to blackmail her and all got very complicated, and then got in somebody else's hands and it was sold and eventually sold. She'd bought it for $25,000 and was sold, I think, for $800,000. And I mean, the first thing is how extraordinary that people want to spend that much money on watches. I mean, I guess very, very rich people are looking for things that will appreciate and value that might be worth investing in, because this is just extraordinary, this thing, isn't it? You know, I mean, it told the time in various different ways, didn't it? It was just completely unnecessary.
Oh, yeah. It was, it's full of all kinds of refinements. It's the sort of thing that watch fans, and there are such things as watch fans, probably more people who are watch fans nowadays than ever before.
Yeah.
Because they're no longer practical, are they, really? You know, a watch used to be something that, you know, your father bought you or something like that. Or people
and you had to have. Yeah, but you don't have to have it anymore now because you've got a phone in your pocket.
It was a sign.
Three dial houses, didn't it, with 3 different apertures showing the day, the month, and the moon phase. 3 sub-dials with seconds, elapsed minutes, and date. I mean, it's just fantastically unnecessary stuff. But it's there, and you just want to buy it.
Well, she bought it, and the circumstances of her buying it, which is, you know, not long before he was killed. Well, she bought it for his 40th birthday, isn't that right? And so this was a time when they were kind of picking up the threads of their relationship, weren't they? After a period, his lost weekend, as it's called, and her dalliance with an art world socialite, and he was starting to write songs again, and they'd made that record. And so she bought him this watch because she was in charge of investments, wasn't she? She ran the operation. You know, she was the person who said, all right, we're going to buy however many apartments they bought in the Dakota. And, you know, we're going to invest in high-end dairy cattle or whatever else they invested
Which I think is really interesting, isn't it? Because their lives are very different. I mean,
well, she was a very wealthy person. You know, she came from a wealthy background.
Almost aristocratic.
Cannot lose sight of that, you know.
Yeah.
And he couldn't have been more different, really. You know, he was reckless and irresponsible. She wasn't. You know, she came from old money in Japan, and you know, money finds money. And
he used to sit around, according to this piece, just watching soap operas and eating bran biscuits and rice, smoking chitanes and listening to either classical music or music, and being the house husband and baking bread and looking after Sean, etc. And she would be out investing in cattle companies and things like that. Amazing.
So she bought the watch and she got the inscription on the back, you know, to John, whatever it says, you know, just like starting over or something. And there he was, kind of supposedly starting again. I mean, he kind of sheds a bit of light and just what a strange and unique marriage they had, you know.
Very peculiar.
And she gave this watch to him, and he was very taken with it, and so he's photographed with it a number of times. But as it says, after he died, she eventually put the watch in a locked room in one of their apartments in the Dakota. And then there's a long period elapses where nobody remembers seeing the watch at all. And then this chauffeur who's worked for them for quite a long while departs in somewhat disputed and acrimonious circumstances, having been told apparently at some stage, oh, help yourself, why don't you take something, a souvenir, take one of John's watches. And so he apparently took this watch And it was only when years later this kind of turns up in the watch trade, because it's been used as a security against a debt or something, that it's drawn to Yoko's attention that John's watch is gone. So she goes looking in the room, unlocks the room, and lo, there it isn't.
There it isn't.
Which is just absolutely
Which is complicated, isn't it? Because when she then, it is complicated. He was told to help himself to something, but specifically not that.
Well, apparently,
but that's very loose.
Because don't forget, because Sean is quoted in this piece, their son, who says, of all the things that we've had stolen from us, of all the things of my father's that we've had stolen from us, that was the most hurtful, which suggests that this kind of thing is not unusual, that wealthy, famous people have loads of people drifting through in employment or close relationships of one kind or another. And it's not unknown for people to think, I'm going to help myself to something.
There was a big case with a guy called Frederick Seaman, wasn't there, who was Lennon's last personal assistant. And he left, I think, soon after the death of Lennon or whatever, and was discovered to have taken loads of things. And you imagine how complicated that must be. Because whoever you're employing them to be in a house where every single artifact naturally has a value. Because it's John Lennon's ashtray, or it's John Lennon's teacup, or it's, it's a scrap of paper that he might have written on. And so if you cross that moral divide where you decide, I'm going to take one or two of these things home, once you've done that, presumably you must just start hoarding things. I mean, it was just appalling. They had a long, drawn-out legal case with him, who also had taken some of his diaries. So I'm very sympathetic. But her problem was that when the watch finished up, I think, with Christie's, she then said, well, I'm the rightful owner of that watch. But she hadn't registered the watch as being stolen because she had no idea, for however long it was, that it had been stolen.
No, quite.
That was the problem.
Quite. So how do you feel about watches, Mark?
Well, my feeling is that if I had unlimited cash, one of the last things that I would spend money on is watches. But you can sort of understand that if you've got absolutely masses of money and are probably being advised to some extent to spend it, actually, then buying a watch, I mean, rock stars just look for things that are going to appreciate and value, don't they? So it's houses, and it's art, and it's sculpture. It's not boats. Boats are a liability in terms of appreciating value. But you can see that I can remember being with, this is 1986, second edition of Q magazine. I went out to Milan to interview Rod Stewart, and I was having a really interesting conversation with him. And I'd suggested at some point that 2 or 3 of the things he'd done in the 70s weren't really up to scratch. And his response was, look, you didn't like them, right? But I'm not after critical appreciation. I'm after making a fat load of cash. And that lunchtime, he went out with Kelly Emberg, his then girlfriend, and he bought, just off the cuff, what it only cost $15,000, I'll admit, but $15,000 seemed an awful lot of money in 1986. And he bought this watch. He came back and he very pointedly showed me this watch he bought as a little kind of frippery. And I sort of understood it, really. He was just saying, I can do this. It's a bit like James Blunt. People have a go at James Blunt, and say he's insipid and vacuous and irritating. His response is always, and mortgage-free.
No, it's funny. I was just reading about the Lennon watch, which is whatever the number is. I can't remember. It has a particular model number.
Yeah,
but there are apparently 2, and so they're only about, I think they say 170 of these watches on Earth or something like that.
That's right.
So it's a very limited edition. But apparently there are 2 that are made in platinum, okay? And one is still in Patek Philippe, and the other was owned for years by Eric Clapton and has now been, made available for sale. I don't know if it's been sold yet, but you can see it on the internet. You can look at this thing and it, being fawned over by quivering watch fans who, this is the Sistine Chapel of watch fans.
That's right.
And it struck me looking at that clip. I've probably been in the same room as that watch, because I've interviewed Eric Clapton a few times. And Eric likes nice things, you know what I mean? He's always liked nice things. He spends a lot of money on clothes, spends a lot of money on cars. spends a lot of money on houses, and clearly spend a lot of money on watches. And it's interesting to me because I have a very rare medical, I don't know how you'd call it, psychological medical condition, which my wife would like me to seek treatment for, because I'm what you call jewellery-blind. I simply don't notice it. You can put me in front of the main window of Tiffany's in New York or down Bond Street or whatever, empty. And I just see a blur of a load of stuff that's kind of silver and gold. And can we move on and look at something slightly more interesting?
Go to a record shop.
Well, not even a record shop. You know, we're quite happy looking at anything other than a jeweler's shop window. It absolutely does nothing for me whatsoever. So, you know, all that stuff, I'm very struck by the fact that people spend a lot of money investing in adornments with the hope that they will impress people. And obviously they do impress quite a lot of people, but I'm not one of them. I always think, you're really wasting your trouble on me.
It's very difficult with jewellery to work out whether people are saying, I've got taste or I've got money.
You don't have the money anymore. They've spent it on the thing of their wrist, you know.
Yeah.
But, no, so but you're quite right about the anything attached to John Lennon has just an extraordinary value, which I suppose has to be linked just to the tragic circumstances of his death. You know, if you had a watch that once belonged to John Wayne, let's say, plucking a name out of nowhere, there's none of that charisma attached to it at all.
No.
Because John Wayne died in his bed or whatever, you know. But John Lennon tragically
There's a poignancy,
arrested.
doesn't it?
There's a poignancy, you know.
Yeah.
Which actually Yoko herself was not slow to kind of, I mean, I don't know if the word is exploit, but you remember that album Season of Glass?
Oh, with this pair of glasses with the blood stain on them.
Yeah.
Oh my Lord, that was upsetting, wasn't
And
it?
you thought that's leaning into the kind of sort of the tragedy of it, you know, even quite a few years later. So here we are, you know, what is it? How many years later? 44 years
44.
later. 44 years later, we're still talking about the stuff that was attached to John Lennon. There you go.
The Word Podcast, prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
Do you know what the piece of music is that's been madly going through my head in the last week, Mark? I don't know if you share my interest in this. It's not anything in the charts or anything. It's not anything anybody's promoting. It's simply the sound of, I don't know, probably, let's say 25,000 orange shirt wearing Dutch fans all going to the left,
Yes,
to the right. I keep firing up YouTube clips of it. I can't get enough of it. I find it incredibly infectious.
What's so brilliant about the Dutch fans is that those clips of them outside the stadiums. And there's something, you know, you associate the whole idea of football chants with just beery blokes kind of just randomly joining in with a version of Song 2 or Go West or whatever it is, you know. But the Dutch fans are drilled is the word, aren't they? They are regimented. There they are, thousands of them, identically dressed with a choreography that they worked at to the left, to the right, with the tune beautifully sung. It's really impressive.
It's just very infectious.
I love them.
But I think that must be that a lot of that is to do with the fact that, you know, there was a time when the Dutch dominated Europe, but it's many, many years ago, so we've forgotten about that. You know what I mean? So the Dutch are not seen as being sinister. I put it to you, if that was the load of German fans or Russian fans or whatever, people wouldn't be feeling quite so relaxed about it. I wouldn't have thought, you know.
No, they think it had a certain threat, but I mean, there's something about the Dutch just seems just so friendly and lovable. And, you know, we've had this conversation before, I know, but have you ever met a Dutch person you didn't like? Never. They're so winning and optimistic and friendly. You know?
And also, do you know the other you know, stereotypical fact about the Dutch, which you're allowed to, you know, talk about, once every few years at a major sporting occasion like the Euros or the Olympics or whatever, is, of course, whatever the competition is, the Dutch will be the tallest competitors taking part.
Oh, yeah.
Because they are the tallest nation on God's earth, aren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, is that
raised entirely on growth promoting dairy products?
It's absolutely extraordinary.
Well, they haven't started basketball. They probably have, actually.
So, yes, that's one of my musical ways.
Yeah, the other thing that struck me was just this thing about Seven Nation Army. I mean, we kind of know how Seven Nation Army got there.
Well, go on. How did it get there? Go and tell me.
I think it was, if I remember rightly, it was in a match between the Belgian club Bruges.
Yeah.
And they were playing against AC Milan in 2006. And supposedly, the fans beforehand, a lot of them had been in this pub drinking. And Seven Nation Army had been on the jukebox, and they were singing this riff. They picked up on da 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 da. They picked up this riff, and they were marching off towards the game, singing the riff. And when they won, it got picked up by the crowd, and they sang it. And then Roma then played against Club Bruges, and the Roma fans nicked it off them, and therefore it got into bigger stadiums, and it got onto TV coverage, and it just started from there. And then since then, it's been, I don't know, the Baltimore Ravens, the Buffalo Bills, isn't it? The Detroit Lions. There's loads of American kind of baseball and football teams that have picked up on it. And I mean, used in absolutely everything. It was used at one point by Trump, actually. But anyway, it's there. And it just struck me that it must be now one of the most, even actually people probably don't know what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure.
But it must be one of the best known songs, if you like, in the entire world. You know, whatever it is, there'll be national anthems, there'll be Happy Birthday, there'll be White Christmas, as Hey Jude, as Sweet Caroline, Go West. I don't know, but up there with that is Seven Nation Army.
I put it to you, that has gone beyond being a song. It's not a song. It's not a tune. It's a kind of thing. It's like we always need a new word for it, for that kind of thing, because it just conjures a kind of vibe, doesn't it? And
yeah, it does.
And there's loads of things that makes me think of, which is how one of them is, does Jack White, derive huge revenue from its massive
popularity? Well, I was
popularity?
thinking the same thing, and I've got no idea. It can't promote sales of the song.
Well, nobody's bothered about promoting sales anymore.
It's long gone. But I mean, even if it did, it wouldn't, because people don't make that connection. It's just a riff, and I can't work out whether or not, if it appears in broadcasts or whatever, there's anything in that for him.
Well, if the crowd is singing it, does it count? Does it get registered for PRS?
As a performance?
Because everything else on every other bit of music on radio or television, it gets logged somewhere, that it's being played for 10 seconds or 2 minutes or whatever, and there's a few pennies go into somebody's account somewhere down the line years later. But
likewise, and Building is song 2 by Blur, isn't it? We were both watching that Portugal-Turkey match last night, and after the goals, that's what you now get, is the dun 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 dun, and it sounds absolutely thrilling.
Well, they will get money from that, won't they? Because that'll be registered by the stadium that they play it, because it's officially coming through the PA. That's
right, it's coming through the PA. Seven Nation Army is too.
Slight tangent. While we're talking about Portugal, the Portugal game. Who were they playing? I've forgotten now. It's gone out my head. Who they were playing?
Portugal, Turkey.
Turkey. There you go.
Yeah.
This game, I didn't watch all of it. Watched most of it. But my attention was drawn to the fact that this match was stopped, I think, 6 times.
Five times, I think, by people running on the pitch.
For people running on the pitch to have their pictures taken with Cristiano Ronaldo. Now, and which TV dutifully doesn't show you because it doesn't wish to encourage it. And I can understand all that stuff. And Roberto Martinez is asked about it in the press conference afterwards. And he says, well, the first occasion was just a kid who wanted a souvenir, but after, repeat occasions, it went too far. I think he and the football authorities and everybody's saying should come down harder on this thing. It's never acceptable, ever. You know what I mean? The person going on in the first place was not looking for a souvenir. They were looking to draw attention to themselves, weren't they? You know what I mean? Because it's now regarded as kind of okay to do this, you know.
Well, it's a particularly difficult situation because the Observer this morning have printed pictures of all 5 of them in order. And the first one, of course, is this little boy. He must be about, 8, 9, 10. And he's got the Portugal top on, and he's run on stage. He's got through security. And when he got to Ronaldo, because Ronaldo melted and just thought, oh, well, look, he's come. You know, let's make a fuss of him. Puts his arm around him, poses for the pictures, seems delighted. And that, of course, means it's kind of opened the door for everyone else. And as they come in after that, they subsequently get older and more cynical looking. And as you say, it's just, I thought it was just ridiculous.
The 8-year-old boy, I've not seen this. I've not seen the Observer thing. I know it was a young child. No 8-year-old boy goes on the pitch, a European Championship major game, in the middle of the game, without the collusion and active participation of a bunch of bloody adults who ought to know better. Would you let a child of yours...
No, he's not on this game on his own.
For God's sake, it's absolutely ridiculous. You know, this game is taking place, you know, the kind of, Turkey and trying to get back in the game or whatever. And, you know, loads of people are really invested in this, from the people on the pitch to the people in the crowd to the millions of people at home in Istanbul or, you know, or Lisbon or wherever. Even us, we're all invested in this. And you think you've got the right to stop that just so you can get something cute happening for you and your family. I'm sorry, it's absolutely bloody outrageous.
But they're saying this morning now that Ronaldo's people will be taking on the security at these venues because they don't feel it's safe for him to play.
Well,
I mean, the whole thing's got ridiculous because actually, strictly speaking, they've got all that security. How could they even allow the people on the pitch in the first place?
It's ridiculous.
I have no idea.
But anyway, social media, you know, continues to challenge our idea of what's acceptable. And I'm going to give you an example of this that happened in my life yesterday, Mark. I was on the tube going into the West End, and a couple sat opposite me, early 30s. They looked as if they're kind of dressed up to go somewhere, not a wedding, but you know they were bent on pleasure, Mark. You know they were in celebratory mood. They both had headphones on, and they both spent most of the time looking at their phones. So effectively, they weren't in the space that I was in, i.e. the carriage. They were in their own little defined space, you know, bounded by the headphones and the phone that they were looking at. And she held out a phone at arm's length, pouted in a very marked fashion, took a picture of herself, then moved the camera up top, pouted, took another picture, moved the camera around to the left, pouted, took another picture. In all, Mark, and I was counting, she took 12 pictures of herself, okay? Then...
But nothing special, just her on a tube, right?
No, hold on a second. Pouting like crazy, dressed up. You know, she obviously thought, I look great at this point. And then she engaged her partner, husband, boyfriend, whatever, in doing the same thing. So they put their heads together. They both did peace signs, and they both pouted, and then took another 5 pictures. And I'm sorry, if this is happening directly across from you, you sort of can't take your eyes off it. And it was only when I was looking at her for a while, I noticed behind her on the side of the carriage, London Transport had affixed the latest sign that they put there from time to time in their campaigns to try and moderate people's behaviour one way or another. You know, years ago, they used to have signs saying no smoking, no spitting, or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Now they kind of moved on. And I noticed behind her is a sign that just says staring Just says the word staring. And underneath, this can be interpreted as sexual harassment. Please don't do it. I thought, this is ridiculous. I've got somebody in front of me who's been doing everything in the world to draw attention to herself. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
She dedicated her journey to making sure that everybody knows how fabulous she looks, you know what I mean? And recording as many pictures of it as she possibly can. And so, and at the same time, there's a sign enjoining us, to kind of not look at each other.
Yeah, don't interact with each other, don't invade each other's space, precisely.
It's just absolutely extraordinary, So the kind of, we're expected to accept the idea of people that people taking pictures of themselves to make themselves look fabulous is a kind of an interruption to our daily lives that we ought to put up with. And that can range from a European Championship game being stopped so that a bunch of people can do this with Cristiano Ronaldo, to an average tube journey being slightly interrupted by people doing the same thing in the carriage. And you just wonder, at what point does this stop? You know what I mean? It's sort of gone too far, hasn't it?
It's gone way too far. Well, as of tomorrow, I wouldn't be at all surprised there won't be some massive fine whereby it's 20,000 euros for pitch invasion or for taking a picture or something. I don't know. Anything they can police, I'm not sure. But,
I think a night in choking, and I don't care if they're 8-year-olds. A night in choking. That is soon sorted out.
This is a junction in the word podcast. It separates that bit from this next bit.
Have you ever gone to gigs on your own?
Well, I did a bit when I was reviewing, back in the day, because a lot of the time, although you always got 2 tickets, it was really nice to go with somebody, it was just very hard if you took someone along to feel it wasn't a terrible imposition for them. You're going to see some kind of experimental group that they've never heard of. And them not enjoying themselves would make you feel a bit uncomfortable and might even affect the colour of your review, actually, because you're seeing it through the eyes of somebody who really doesn't like it or whatever. So the answer to that is no, not really. Occasionally, the Shepherd's Bush Empire is quite near here. And when we were at Word, very kindly, a lot of the PRs would always just say, look, if you want to go any time. And I'd sometimes went down with my youngest son when he was about 13 or 14, just see 2 or 3 songs on a school night. And sometimes I just go on my own and just sit up top in a seat and just watch. And I quite liked it, actually, because you don't feel self-conscious about worrying about somebody else's reaction. Do you know what I mean?
Definitely know what you mean. I'll go further. I prefer going on my own, actually. I've decided now. Because, if you take somebody, generally speaking, whether it's the good lady wife or, even one of your children or whatever, there's a kind of, it's sort of incumbent upon you for them to have a good time. It's kind of your fault if they don't, you know what I mean? They've gone along with certain expectations. If you go along on your own, you have no expectations whatsoever. And you can be delighted, you can be disappointed, you can be absolutely everything in between. And it won't matter to anybody but yourself. And no, it's interesting because we're reading this piece. I can't remember where it was. It was in the Times.
In the Times, wasn't it? Yeah.
About this woman who'd gone to see Taylor Swift on her own. At one of the massive gigs she'd been playing in the
She
UK.
went to Murrayfield, didn't she, I think?
That's right.
And made some really good points because she was saying she talked about the agony of trying to buy a ticket and getting the right code.
Well, it was
it's such a misery, isn't it?
For a start, the ticket was it £299?
£299.
And she decided, quite rightly, all right, if I could justify spending it for one, it would be a bit extravagant to spend it for 2, particularly if she had no idea who the other person was going to be. So, she decided she was going to do it on her own. And she had a certain amount of apprehension about this because she thought she'd never done it before. But then she thought it's Taylor Swift and it's mostly women, so it's probably a slightly less threatening atmosphere than it would be at some things. I'm sure it's a good deal less threatening. And And she went along and thoroughly enjoyed it, didn't she? Because she wasn't the only one, was she?
Wasn't the only one. She said that was really interesting. There was some research done. They said that 28% of the people of the tickets sold for Taylor Swift were to people who are going on their own.
Really?
Partly because it's so ruinously expensive. I'm sure that they couldn't afford more than that. But I mean, actually, there was something quite exciting about being on your own at that and meeting other people on their own, and you're all part of some little gang, and you've clearly got something very, very strong bond between you.
Sure.
I thought it was really good. And also, she pointed out that, you know, in the days of the iPhone, you're never alone. You're never alone with an iPhone. You can immediately, if you're self-conscious about standing there waiting for the show to start on your own with no one to talk to, you can give the impression that you're there, you know, on behalf of all your pals, reporting from the front line, you know.
And also, this is part of a broader trend, isn't it? That people are doing a lot more things on their own thanks to the phone, isn't that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Dining out is
well, that used to be a thing where if you went to a restaurant and there was somebody on their own, they were usually a travelling salesman,
a rep,
and they had the evening paper propped against a bottle of Matthias, didn't they? And they were reading a paperback.
half a bottle. Let's get this right. Half a bottle of Matthias Rosé and a Harold Robbins paperback. Or Arthur Haley's Airport or whatever.
Exactly.
Those are the days. I actually, sorry, a slight tangent again. When Mark and I first joined Smash Hits in the early 80s, we used to go to Peterborough once a fortnight when the magazine went to press. And we used to have to spend 2 days at the printers just passing pages. And in between, we had one night usually at the Ball Hotel in Peterborough, which we used to complain about. We quite like complaining about it, but we're actually at the same time being quite thrilled to have a night in a hotel and then to be able to have a steak dinner.
And the pepper steak. Absolutely, you have the same thing every time. Bottle of red wine, pepper steak, something from the trolley, and there was an act occasionally. Do you remember that? Was there occasionally a band that played in the corner?
No, not in the Ball. They did in the Moat House, Peterborough.
The Moat House. That's right. We invented fictitious names for the bands. One of which was the Flying Savoy Brothers and Janet. There's a wonderful couple who come to our Word in Your Ear quiz every Friday night, which I thoroughly recommend if you don't. They're brilliant. And it's a girl called Sarah Pettigrew and their other half, Derek. And they're always known as Sarah Pettigrew and Derek, as if they too were a kind of performing duo in the Moat House, Peterborough.
Talking of fantastical, non-existent cabaret entertainers, I was playing some Joni Mitchell records the other day. The later Joni Mitchell Asylum records, I think you'd call them that. So kind of Hajira and Don Juan's Reckless Daughter and that stuff. They've just been reissued in some remastered version. It just gives you an excuse to go listen to them again. Oh, of course, they're really good records. And I found myself listening to these in the background, and I was sun was shining, Mark. I don't know what had come over me, but I was singing along, and I was singing along. I think I sound like Reg Snipton, which is the. I was singing, it was the hexagon of the heavens. It was the strings of my guitar, like a washed up kind of northern club singer.
I know. Reg Snipton was a character. He was a Smash Hits character invented by Tom Hibbert, really, wasn't he? As a kind of awful old club singer. That's fantastic. The idea about Reg Snipton, which I love, is that you have to think of him singing, as you say, Joni Mitchell, some of the most precious and poetic lyrics, which makes it much funnier. So it's kind of a helicopter lands on the Pan Am roof like a dragonfly on a tomb. That's right, isn't it? There'll be icicles and birthday clothes, and sometimes there'll be sorrow. Now's your chance. Like a circle in a circle, like a wheel within a wheel, never ending or beginning, like an ever spinning reel. Can you hit the back? I'm here all week. You talk like Marlena Dietrich. You dance like as easy as your hair. Your clothes are all made by Balmain, and there's diamonds and pearls in your hair. Yes, there are, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls.
He used to do it with
We used to do it with Love Was Terrace, but I was Joy Division running. You love will tear us apart. Okay, let me hear you say love.
The Word Podcast. Clearly, there is no plan.
Okay, and here I think we're joined by Alex Gold. Hello, Alex.
Hello.
Morning, Magic.
Now, this is Patreon Corner. There are two reasons why, if you're not already a Patreon supporter, you should sign up to be a Patreon supporter of Word in Your Ear. And the first is obviously because of all the special privileges you get from being a Patreon supporter. You get advance notice of everything we're doing. You get everything we do in full and in pictures where applicable. And you take part in the Friday night quiz, and there's access to events. There's all kinds of benefits. But two, the second reason, it's even more important. It's the warm glow that you get from knowing that you've helped keep this show on the road, as it has been on the road for the last however long, since 2006. You'll be doing your bit to keep it going into the future, just as these people have done who've signed up to be Patreon supporters. They've signed up recently, haven't they, Alex?
They have indeed. There's quite a few, so I hope you're sitting comfortably.
And we're sitting comfortably.
Here we go. Lewis Payne.
Right. Carry on.
Scott Schwartz. Paul Vipond. Shivsy. Shivsy.
Is that what he says on it?
Happy Mondays.
Is that what it says on his credit card? Shivsy.
Yeah. Rupinder Bajwa.
Right. Lovely.
The monosyllabic Mark.
That sounds like a variety out. The monosyllabic Mark and Janet. Go on, Karen.
Dion Ashton. Colin Johnson. Philip Doyle. Steve Mansfield. James Hirons. Michael Flynn. Mark Sandell. And the next batch of patrons are all annually subscribed. Now, if you subscribe annually, you get 15% off, which is not to be sniffed at, of course.
Not to be sniffed at.
And they are Mark Adams, Stratobacker, my favourite guitar, Rob Ladew, David Furness, Tim Pott, one word, Pedigree Insight, possibly not real name, Eric Groneweg, Stephen O'Reilly, Hugh Fillimore, and we have one more patron who is subscribed to the Clubhouse tier, which means you get every single benefit we offer, of which there are many, and also the privilege of having Mark and Dave come round digitally to your gaff to excitedly rummage through your record collection.
So you can show us your favourite records. Very good fun.
And that is Johnny Wren. There we are.
Superb.
Well,
Stratobacker, particularly welcome. What a great name.
All those people are very welcome, and you're more than welcome to join them. And if you want to know how you might join them, just go to patreon.com/wordinyour-ear. And now over to this week's birthday boy.
The Word Podcast. Fix yourself a drink and it's like being in the pub.
So we're joined by this week's special Patreon birthday boy, Guy Constant. Hello, Guy. Where are you?
Morning. I'm in Reading.
And the birthday was on Thursday, so you've got over that, right?
Yes.
How was that celebrated, Guy?
Well, on the day, it was a working day, so not very much, but I'm off for a barbecue this afternoon.
You devil.
And the sun's out.
And the
Absolutely.
sun is out.
Nothing can ever
Nothing
go
wrong
wrong.
with that at all.
Unless you're a Scotland supporter.
And
that's later in the evening.
Football, yes,
Yeah, don't worry.
To ruin it.
So, Guy, as is traditional with our birthday guests, you've got a kind of a conversational log to throw on the smouldering fire of Word in Your Ear. What is it?
Well, the question, and it probably betrays the fact that I'm probably slightly old-fashioned in these things. Does brilliant musicianship in pop music tend to ruin it?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's fun.
Next question.
I think you got the one.
Have you got a particular example in mind? Have you got a particular example in mind?
I've got several. The one that really is sort of registered on my mind is probably 10 years ago. My brother and I, as a birthday present for our father, who was always a great jazz fan, but when I say jazz, I mean sort of Ella Fitzgerald, Frank Sinatra type jazz. We saw an advertisement at Ronnie Scott's for the Great American Songbook, and we thought, perfect. That would be good son behaviour to take him out to the Great American Songbook at Ronnie Scott's. He'd never been, we'd never been, and we weren't expecting Frank Sinatra or Ella Fitzgerald, obviously, but we you can guess what we were expecting. Anyway, we turned up, nice meal, all that sort of stuff, and then on came the band, and the lead singer said slightly apologetically, this isn't the Great American Songbook as you might understand it. These are all great songs, and they're all American. And off she went. And these were songs we had never heard by the most obscure jazz. And the musicianship was clearly brilliant. As a non-musician, I could tell that they were pretty bloody good. But it went on for hours. And it was unrecognisable, and there was even a xylophone solo, as well as the bass, the drums, the saxophone solos. And I just remember going out thinking, right, and this might be the thing where I'm old-fashioned. It was the songbook. I wanted songs. I wanted 4-minute pop songs. What I got was, some of it went on for 20 minutes.
Well, you see, that is now Ronnie Scott's is a fine venue. I was there myself only a couple of weeks ago, and I don't mean to disrespect it in any way, but say people have an understanding of what the Great American Songbook means nowadays. They've heard it. Rod Stewart's done it. I don't know. Robbie Williams has done it. Loads of people done it. We know what it means. It means a bunch of songs. Probably from the shows and from the 50s and 60s or whatever, certain amount of them celebrating American cities or American experiences or whatever. It's a broad show business prospect that you could place before the most general of audiences and they would understand it. If somebody is using it as an excuse that the bass player gets to show off, no, they don't even want to play their favorite songs. Yeah. No. Here's the point. Beyond a certain point, most musicians, or many musicians, have no interest whatsoever in entertaining an audience. Doesn't enter their head. This is what they're interested in. Do I get to do my bit? Yeah. That's what they're bothered about. And so any evening that allows them to do whatever they see as their party piece for that time, they'll do it. And they don't care if people have a wretched evening out. It really doesn't enter their heads. They're the only branch of entertainment where this applies. You know, and it's only applied in the last kind of 40, 50 years. Nobody did this kind of pre-war. Nobody did this in the 50s.
No, there was discipline.
It kind of was. You had band leaders. You couldn't do that in the Buddy Rich Orchestra or the Glenn Miller Band or whatever. You wouldn't be allowed. It's only since you have the idea that a band is a kind of sort of democracy. We're a band of strolling players who just bumped into each other outside and we just happen to have our instruments. And we're going to do our thing. Well, obviously they've got to do their thing, but it's got to be balanced with a load of other competing, demands as well.
And I think,
and also you're talking about brilliant musicians, but which implies virtuoso.
Yes.
And that's the interesting thing, I think, is that, there are virtuoso musicians who don't ruin things.
Yeah.
By going, Richard Thompson, really good example. Andy Partridge, Frank Zappa, Dave Rawlins, Prince, Johnny Marr, incredible musicians who don't kind of overcook things.
Well, and Prince is a good example because I'm a huge fan of his, but I was talking to my brother about this the other day. He and I went, when Prince did his sort of O2 residency, however many that was, for months on end, a group of us went, including my brother and I, and he was brilliant. One and only time I ever saw him, and he was fantastic. And he made light of his musicianship, in the sense that he was playing guitar solos and he was spinning on his high heels while he was doing it. He was playing guitar solos. He sometimes threw the guitar into the audience where a roadie must have captured it. A roadie threw another guitar, must have been attached to some kind of wire that Prince then ducked under and carried on playing. So he was slightly making light of it. But my brother said, yeah, it went on far too long, though.
You see, that is the other great truth about live entertainment. Pretty much without exception, the audience enjoy two bits of it: the beginning and the end. And generally speaking, they enjoy the end slightly more than anything else. You know what I mean? Whereas the musician doesn't feel it like that at all. Yeah. The musician just think, no, I've got to do the new tune. I got to look what because they're at work. It's different, you know, and they haven't been there all day. You know, the audience are absolutely exhausted. They want to go home or whatever. Mind you, it's funny you should say about Prince, because his actual shows were very slick. But he also used to do those post-show shows, and I've been to two of those. And
did another 3 hours.
God, they were self-indulgent.
Right.
My God, that was like hearing 10 years after jamming. You know, it really was. You know, boy, they could be dull. And you know, so he was not immune to from that.
Well,
you know,
you said jamming. I think the sort of the scariest thing you ever hear about one of your favourite artists who's recorded a new album is he's interviewed and he says, well, we just got into the studio and we jammed for a bit.
Nobody says that anymore, do they? Do they?
I don't know. Maybe they don't.
You're not old enough, but Mark and I are old enough to remember the days. It's quite interesting, actually, in the late 60s. You know, you'd had all these groups coming up in the 60s, the Beach Boys and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and all this. And then the kind of supergroup era came in, which was very much modelled on kind of jazz. You know, let's get along so-and-so to play drums. Or
Mike
whatever.
Bloomfield and Al Cooper, Dave.
Mike Bloomfield and Al Cooper. All those things, super sessions. And so there used to be a regular speculation in the kind of the letters pages of the Melody Maker or whatever. You know, wouldn't the Beatles be even better if they had Ginger Baker playing drums or whatever? And you think, at that point, you should just stop and go, no, that is fundamentally wrong. Let's, you know, if pop music is going that way, let's all stop and burn it all down and build another one starting tomorrow, you know, because that's not the point, you know. Virtuosity is not the point, you know. And I tell you the other thing on this point, I was thinking, do you remember Martin Rushent, no longer with us, but, you know, engineer, producer. And I remember, I never forgot this. And he produced the Human League's Dare. You know, it was a huge, big hit album. And he probably did other big hit albums during the 80s. But he'd had quite a long career. And I remember reading an interview with him in the 80s where he said, I've worked with Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and I've worked with the Human League. And I think Phil Oakey is a better musician than Keith Emerson. Now, Phil Oakey could barely play anything at all, but Phil Oakey could make up his mind about something. You know, right. I like that. That tune, you know, I've got an idea what it is. Whereas Keith Emerson had a million options and didn't really know what to pursue at all.
That's the truth, isn't it? That exactly, because he had in his head the clear idea of what it was he wanted to record. Emerson, Lake and Palmer's approach was to try every single thing they could possibly and then pick the best one, you know. But I think that whole thing about brilliant musicians, John Lennon, a really good example. John Lennon couldn't really play the piano and he used to compose on piano because he was so bad he would constantly surprise himself by these mistakes that he made and it would lead him off in interesting directions.
Oh, right.
That's a really good approach, I think.
Yes.
But
really
it's funny.
original.
It's funny if you, I was watching a thing not long ago with an interview profile of the Berlin Philharmonic, you know, which is one of the most venerable classical orchestras in the world, and talking to the players, interviewing the players, And these people, if you get to be third violin in the Berlin Philharmonic, you're a world class. You really are. And they were saying, I remember this woman being interviewed saying, I don't regard myself as creative at all. I'm a skilled professional, performing artist. My job is to do what the conductor wants me to do and what the music tells me to do. My job is not to go up there and regale the audience with a few things that have just entered my head, not at all. And all that's quite a recent invention, the idea that the bass player should have something to say. That's quite a recent thing. And the people who have really encouraged it have been the bass players, not anybody else. There's nobody in the audience. The audience is not.
It's so unfair that everybody else gets a solo. Why not? It's not remotely thinking from the point of view of someone's got to sit through a 20-minute bass solo.
And I think that is the point you made earlier about it's forgetting that actually we have to entertain people.
It doesn't enter
it's the old
the
gag
head.
of the natives in the swamp, isn't it? What happens when the drums stop? Bass solo. It's got a New Yorker cartoon.
Yeah. So in answer to your question, Guy, does virtuoso musicianship ruin pop music? Yes, it does, and it should be stopped and stamped out. Well, thank you for providing that topic of conversation, and belated happy birthday to you, and thanks for your support, and I hope it continues.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.